They had a lot of caves and stuff for people to hide out, and it was a dangerous road. And so the story that Jesus is telling, it may very well have happened. He didn't give any names. That may very well have been the case. And people would have thought, well, yeah, that could happen. And so that's one of the things that makes the parable so compelling is a lot of them, they were in the people's, it wasn't some far out thing that's not going to happen. Well, no, that wasn't the way the parables worked. They were common stories. So anyway, let's go ahead and read chapter 10. And we will start in verse 25. We'll stop at verse 30. Chapter 10, 25, and we'll go to verse 30 for the moment. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And we're going to stop there for just a moment. First of all, some of your translations will probably, if it's an older translation, will probably say this man is a what? Anyone have a thought on that? What's the word that's used? A lawyer. It's a lawyer. But the thing is, this person was not a lawyer as we think of a lawyer today. He wasn't an attorney. He wasn't representing people in court or anything like that. A better translation or a better description of this person would be an expert in the law. And the reason why he was an expert in the law was because he was a scribe. And scribes basically didn't do much but sit down and copy. They didn't have Xerox machines, okay? They didn't have Ricoh or whatever company is out there. They didn't have copy machines, so they were the copy machine. And he sat down and meticulously wrote out day after day, wrote the Old Testament down day after day. I think I give that out as a punishment to my kids if they do something wrong. Write rule number 3 up there 100 times. But they didn't see it as a punishment. They had to write that thing, that they wrote it down, and that was their job. Now you think about it for a second. You write something enough and you do what? You learn it. You do. It just you can't help but do it. It gets in there. And so yes, he was an expert in what it said. Now, what he did with it, that's another story, okay? But he was an expert in what it said. And so he comes to Jesus, and it says he came to do what? Where I lost it here. Where is it? Just a moment. It says he came to do what? What was his purpose here? Someone tell me what his purpose. Frank, what's his purpose? To test Jesus. Okay, me being a teacher, I know the person who tests is the teacher, and the person who gets tested is the student. So what position does this expert in the law think he is? He thinks he's the teacher and Jesus is the student. That's really what he's thinking. Now, I will be honest with you, I think it's even worse than that. Okay? Number one, he certainly didn't come to learn anything. He probably came to trap Jesus in some way. He probably came to discredit Jesus because, after all, he was the expert in the law. You don't have anything to teach me. I'm the one who's the expert here. And he didn't say that, but that's kind of what it means when you say he came to test him. He certainly wasn't coming to have a changed life. He wasn't coming to have a changed life. It wasn't that wasn't his intent. He wasn't coming for transformation. Others did. Zacchaeus was like, I want to repent. Go ahead, Frank.
When you read chapter 25, you will notice that Jesus is not deviating from the conversation which came within the what is written in your law? So Jesus started testing him back upon what he thinks he knows. Tell me what is written in your law.
He did.
So he didn't say, well, let's take an next conversation, let's take some and explain. But he tell me what is written in your law. So I want to know where you stand upon what you
He threw it back to him. He did throw it back to him. Now, he didn't do it that way twice. He did it that way once, and there's a reason. We're going to talk about that in a second. To see the second time the question, a question was asked, he told the story. Okay, and we'll get to that in a moment. But no, the expert in the law is coming to Jesus, to try to trap him, to test him in some way. He wasn't coming to learn, but Jesus, he engaged with him anyway. He told it was an opportunity for him to teach, and he did. He puts the onus back on him, just like Frank said. He says, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And after all, this guy's an expert in the law. You should know. It kind of puts it back on him, and I think it's pretty. He does it pretty well. He's like, how do you say it? And he responds with what's called the Shema in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And just about every Jewish boy had this memorized by heart. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself is another one. It's in Leviticus. But they knew this. It was something that was part of their, it was part of their psyche, really. And so he responded to it, and Jesus said, you've answered what? You're wrong? What did he say? He said, you're answered what? Correctly. He said, you've answered correctly. Now, here's the thing about that. How many people, I just want to bring this out because I don't think this comes out very much. How many of us, or how many, and I say not just in this room, how many people in general have kept that law? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. How many people have kept that? Say it again, Frank. None. None have kept that. And that's why Jesus had to die on the cross. Because we have not kept God's law. That's the whole thing about the law. It's not capable of saving us because none of us have kept it. And Jesus knew that. When he spoke back to the man and said, do this and you will live, he knew that very well. Jesus knew why he had to go to the cross. Even this expert in the law, he was a sinner. He didn't keep that law. So let's move on. He may have thought he did, but he didn't. So what happens next here? Takes the expert of the law back to the law, and then he replies with the Shema. And then let me just ask, what does it say, the second question? He asked him a second question. He says, and who is my neighbor? The second one is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. So he asks, this is second, there it is, and who is my neighbor? Why did he ask that question? It tells us. Why did he ask that question, Frank? Or I'm sorry, Elise. Good. It's just people you're in contact with. Your neighbor doesn't have to be someone in a house next to you. But excellent point. But why did this man ask the question? Frank?
Because under his law, he knew anybody outside his tribe was nothing to him, like the Jews would consider the Gentiles as dog. So once you was not a Jew, I had nothing to do with you. So you cannot be my neighbor if you're not a Jew.
You are correct, Frank. That is exactly, I do believe what he was thinking in his head. But back to the original question. Why did he ask that question? It tells us in the text. Anybody looking at it? It's right up there. He wanted to do what? He wanted to justify himself. He wanted to justify himself. He was kind of like, well, you know, I may not have helped somebody the other day, but was that man my neighbor? You know, was that did I have to help him? In other words, who's the least number of people I can get away with without having to help them? You know, I mean, what's the least amount I can do? It was a question that had been brought up before. He was trying to justify himself, and that was the reason for the question. And Jesus doesn't say, what does the law say? Because chances are, he knows what the man would have said. The man likely would have said, well, go back to the original verse, you know, and if you look in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, and we'll go ahead and turn there. Let's see, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, here we go. Leviticus 19, verse 18, it says, pull that up. I'll go ahead and read it. It says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And that's the verse that the man would likely have gone to. And what does it say in that verse? There it is. Thank you very much, Cameron. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. What does that tend to say that the neighbor is? One of your people, right? Just like Frank said, one of your tribe, one of your people. And that's probably where he would have gone. But he conveniently would likely have forgotten a verse in the same chapter. If you look in that same chapter in verse 34, look what it says in verse 34. It says, and when the alien lives with you in your land, do not mistreat him. The alien, this is in chapter 19, verse 34. The alien living with you must be treated as one of your native born. As one of your native born. Love him as yourself, for you were aliens in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. You see there? You see what it says? It's easy to stop at one verse, right? And say, see, it's one of our people, right? But what does it say? You treat him as if it were one of your people, you know? And so the idea is not to be reading the Bible as to see what least we can get away with. You know, that's not the point. That is not the point. Go ahead.
Following up on your point, it strikes me that at this point he's gone from an academic argument to a we have to do something, right? So I think that the way that this flows, the lesson I take from it is academically, you know, we get into academic arguments frequently, right? But then there's a call to action which comes next. And I think that's why the parable is one of action now. Who is your neighbor in the act? That's the call. And for me, what drifts is that, okay, academically, we're arguing, but at some point, it's got to turn
It's got to be more than that.
And he goes into, now I think, and that's the transition he makes into this parable now, is it's a call for action, right? We've argued, we had an academic argument, now let me show you how academically, you're a genius, academically, fine, great, but now we have to take it to the next step, which is action. And I think that's why he uses an action parable instead of an academic parable in this point. And I take it meaning, let's go. We got to go, let's roll. We got to do. Academically, I know what the Bible says. You going to do anything about it? Are you going to live the life? Or are you just going to argue academically that I know who Christ is and I know who God is?
What's your name, brother? Yeah, thank you, brother. That is exactly right. And to this very day, there are people who know the Bible backwards and forwards, but have no Christian confession to it. They don't. There are Bible scholars out there, people who've studied the Bible and know it better than we do. Some of them, they've spent their life studying it, but they don't believe it. It's a shame. Jesus says, it's not enough just to know it. It's not enough. Do you internalize it? Do you make it real? See, this is not Shakespeare. It's not an academic book, just an academic book. It is something that touches our lives. And so, thank you very much, brother. I appreciate that. So, let's see. Let's continue on. Jesus answers with a story, of course. And let's go ahead and read it. Start Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 37. Luke chapter 10, verses 30 through 37. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 silver coins, gave it to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said. And when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. So no, it's no longer a mere academic discussion. It's not scholarly discussion anymore. This is Jesus' preaching. He really is. He's preaching here. Frank.
We notice in Jesus' teaching, he always, that's why the Bible says he comes to fulfill. He always go above the perception of what you already have chronic in your mind. So that's why he asks the question. But then that based upon the teaching,
Say again?
No, like Jesus always go above their perception.
Yes.
He through all his glory, he knows, hey, my neighbor is my surrounding. So based upon Jesus' teaching, he's asking the question, Lord, is there something that I don't know? Then who is my neighbor? There has to be something else that he's talking about, I don't know. So he asks the question, so since my neighbor is somebody else, who is that person? Who are those people? Who are they? Because all I know throughout the years is my neighbor is my immediate surrounding. But now you're telling me about something else, so I don't know.
Well, now the man was in his immediate surrounding. He was on the road.
Right. So you want to know now, based upon your opinion, who is my neighbor? There has to be something else that you have in your mind. I don't know.
I'll tell you what, let's reserve that question to the end here and discuss it. Now, of course, the teacher of the law replied, but we can discuss that a little bit more. Let's hold that to the end if we can, if you don't mind. But a question that we may ask that was left unsaid in the parable is this man who was traveling, who was robbed and beaten and left for dead, do we know anything about him? Does it say anything about this man? We know his name? No, we don't know. Do we know anything about him other than that? Does it say anything about him? It's conspicuously absent, isn't it? And I think that's for a reason. Now, chances are, the people that are listening to the parable thought he was a Jew. Why do you think they may have thought he was a Jew? Why may they have thought that, even though it had no indication in the parable?
He was leaving Jerusalem.
Okay, he was in Jerusalem. I was thinking, that's good. That's a good thought. In other words, he was going from Jerusalem to Jericho, so maybe he was a Jew, yes. My thought is because they were Jews. Don't you normally just kind of think that the people that are unnamed are kind of like you? You know, that's kind of a thought that we do. You know, we sort of make assumptions and stories and things like that. They probably thought that. And in their minds, he may have been a Jew. But the reason I bring this out is because I don't think it matters. And you might say, well, why are you making a big point of something that doesn't matter? Say it again. Exactly. That is the point. Thank you, Les. That is the point. The status or the identity of the person should not determine whether we do good to them or not. It should not matter that the person is of a particular race or is of a particular economic status or is of whatever. Young, old, you fill in the blank. It doesn't matter. Yes?
I suggest that they go a little bit further than that.
Okay, let's do it. Go ahead.
If I remember right, it's been a long time since I've been to Jerusalem, but Jerusalem to Jericho was an 8-hour walk. And therefore, those who were coming down the road not only saw the Samaritans beat up and stuff, but like, oh, what am I going to have to go through? Forget it.
Let me add a little bit more specificity to that. The road to from Jerusalem to Jericho, you had to go up about 300 yards or 300 feet first through the Mount of Olives. And then it was down. You're about let me see, I wrote it down here somewhere. You're about several thousand feet, 2,300 feet above sea level. At Jerusalem, you're 2,300 feet above sea level, and you have to go up a little more to the Mount of Olives, and then you got to go down to Jericho, and Jericho is about 800 feet below sea level. And so you're going down mountains here and crags, and it's a dangerous journey for several reasons. One is probably just a dangerous trip because, if you fall down, you might hurt yourself, but then there's obviously robbers that can be there. Yes?
What I've read on that is approximately 18 miles up and down. Could be easy, no matter who you are.
Now, it's a hard trip. And so, we will get to that in just a minute. I'm going to ask the question about the priest and the Levite here in just a moment, but that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that out. Jerusalem to Jericho is one of the most dangerous roads in the Middle East. They called it the Bloody Way. They had a name for it. It was called the Bloody Way. And my guess is that if you could at all avoid it, you probably should. I mean, that seemed to be the consensus, I would imagine. If you could avoid going to Jericho from Jerusalem, because I had 17 miles, probably depends on where you started, I suppose. But it probably is quite a number of hours to travel 17 miles, especially if it's not just all flat. Very rocky journey, lots of twists and turns, caverns and caves everywhere, place of easy ambush. So obviously this is what happened here. And then introduced a priest and a Levite. Sounds like a bad joke, beginning of a bad joke. And in comes a priest and a Levite. A priest and a Levite come in. Maybe not at the exactly same time, pretty close to each other apparently. And they have a choice to make. What is the choice they have to make?
Choice to heaven.
Frank, what's the choice they have to make?
A choice to heaven.
Okay, they could either help or they could do what? Continue on. And they decide to continue on. Now, I'm going to ask a speculative question here. Why do you think they continued on? Why do you think why didn't they stop and help? I mean, wouldn't you think that maybe some religious people would have kindness in their heart to help this person that was dying on the side of the road? Don't you think? So why might they not have helped? Go ahead.
Callous.
I'm sorry?
Callous.
Callous, okay. They just may have had a callous heart. They didn't have love in their hearts and didn't care. Okay, that may be one reason. Go ahead.
Going back to the point I made earlier, academically, they were a Levite and somebody who would know, right? But they had accepted, they weren't living by
They
accident.
may have known it, but
They known it, I mean, they.
kind of the same thing.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
They just wouldn't.
Okay.
I think he chooses those two examples too, as people telling the lawyer, the expert, these are other experts,
Yeah. Other religious people.
and who do this.
Nick?
The way it's, a lot of times, it's just human nature. We see something, it could be a bad situation. I could get involved in that too. That could be me laying in that situation.
Yeah, you know,
It's here sometimes.
it's still the same way. It's still the same road that they're on. This could be part of an ambush. You know, this guy might not really be hurt. Of course, it might be hard to fake it if you're bleeding. But anyway, but there's an element of danger here. Stopping on this road is an element of danger. Okay, Frank, and then go ahead. Yes.
I think in those days, they will recognize you by either your dressing, so they will recognize that is not my people. So I have no need to stop because it's not my people. It's like we will say, if I'm not American, I will help in America. If you're not American, my help is not for you. You have to be an American for me to show mercy for you as an American.
Yeah.
So they will probably recognize, hey, that is not our people. Let's keep on going.
Well, it may or may not have been, like I said, we don't know the identity of the person. So that could have been the reason. Maybe he wasn't a Jew, maybe he was, but so it's a possible reason that they didn't like, they looked at him and didn't like him. Prejudice, Go ahead.
Very quickly, Scripture also says, for both the Levite and the priest, what did they do when they saw the guy hurt on the side of the road? They passed by on the other side. I have to pass right here.
Don't even want to think about it.
I didn't think that.
Don't even want to think about it. Get it out of mind. Okay. All right. So we got danger, callous. Go ahead again.
But if we take in consideration these times, this is a time when men were made to steal and boats were made of wood. They wrote down this man might have been beat up, but he wasn't. He didn't have a broken leg or anything. Didn't say that. He could have got up and walked on. So,
Yeah, in other words, he could have been faking it, or could have been, maybe he wasn't receptive to help. He might not have been receptive to help. They could have said that, in their heads. So that. All right. What else? Go ahead, Les.
Possible too, being human and learned, educated people, it was a little below them to have to stoop down and help somebody that's hungry.
They would have had to have got off their donkeys, assuming they had one, and gotten off and gotten the help. It wasn't convenient for them. It just wasn't convenient. Yeah, and then they would have had to that lowered themselves, like you said, lowered themselves to help someone in that situation, literally and possibly otherwise. And then, what about this? Well, they were a priest and a Levite. They had duties to go. I mean, they probably had a full calendar. I bet they had a full count. They might have been going to meet somebody. I mean, it was understood that these religious people, they weren't lazy. They had stuff to do. And they just said, well, my ministry is more important than helping this guy. That may have been what they said. They may have said that. Frank?
But if you based on scripture, you would realize the priest and the Levite are the same person, because under the law, only the Levite could be priest. So when you say a Levite and a priest, they are the two same people, because you could not be a priest.
But that's a good question. There's a possible distinction between the two. I didn't actually, I'm ashamed to say, I did not research that. But I do know that they were both religious officials.
Right. The priesthood was only belong to the Levite. So when you read, if you are priest and a Levite, they were the same.
Levite would designate the tribe. The priest would designate the office. Perhaps maybe the Levite was a lesser priest of some sort or something like that. I would have to look into that a little bit more. But good point on that one. But it was a distraction to their ministry. It would have been inconvenient. You know, I will just tell you this, compassion is messy. By the way, if the guy had been bleeding and they'd have come into contact with the blood, or worse yet, if he had died and they'd have come in contact with a dead body, they would have had, their ministry would have been put on hold for 7 days, because it would have been unclean for 7 days. And it was like, they might have considered that. It's a possibility. My ministry is too important to involve myself with this person. Right, exactly. They could not serve in the temple if they had come into contact with blood or come into contact with the dead body. And so, and then involving yourself with someone to help them out, it can be messy. I've mentioned this before, but years ago I was involved with we called it the help ministry, but it was basically helping people who were addicts, alcoholics and drug addicts, and who wanted to come clean. And we would go in once a week, have Bible study with them, and the Lord opened a great opportunity for us to do it. We asked the manager of the facility, can we do this? And at the time, they said, sure, come on in. And I was wondering whether they'd let me preach or not, or let me teach, and they did. They said, and I thought it was going to be once a month. And when I didn't come back the next week, they said, well, where were you? And I thought, well, okay, they want me every week. So anyway, it was a great ministry. But I tell you, when you got down and started talking with these people, many of them did want to come clean, but they had baggage. There was messes there. They had done things in their lives because of the drugs or whatever they'd hurt people. They had children that they were no longer the father to or the mother to, or they were or at least not acting as a father or a mother. And they had struggles of all sorts. And when you get with someone like that to try to help them, you get a little bit of an emotional attachment to try to help somebody with that. You become emotionally involved with people to get them, to help them out. And this doesn't have to be someone who's involved with drugs. It can be anybody. Everybody's got problems. Everybody does. We do. We all have baggage. Everybody the person that looks like they've got everything together has got baggage. Okay, we all do. And when you get with someone to try to share the gospel with them, share your life with them, help them out in some way, you can become, and they can hurt you. They may not even mean to. But people you think are coming along quite well can fall back into old habits and take off, and it hurts. I thought all this time I'd spent with this person trying to help them out, and then, well, let me tell you, God's given us all free choice. And he doesn't take it away. It's there. And so compassion and mercy, it can be messy. It can be messy. It's like the brother back here said, my guy might not have wanted any help. It's true, but the Samaritan, the good Samaritan was willing to stop and find out. At least he was willing to stop and find out. As it turned out, he didn't need some help and wanted some. And so now, we have spent about 10 to 15 minutes talking about all these reasons why the priest and the Levite might have not helped the person. None of those are in the parable. In other words, that's all speculation. That is all speculation. And you might think, once again, why did we spend so much, if it wasn't in the parable, why did we spend so much time talking about all these reasons that the priest and the Levite didn't help out? And the reason is this. Because once again, it doesn't matter. Jesus wasn't interested in any of those excuses, was he? He didn't address anyone because none of them were good enough. None of them were good enough. That's the reason. He expects us, and he expected the priest and the Levite and the Good Samaritan to stop and help the person. That was the thing to do. And that was it. And so that's all the speculation is like, it's, all right. Let's enter another character, of course, now as the Samaritan comes in. The Samaritan comes. What do you think might have been going through his mind? No. Here's what I wrote down. The question is, what do you think might have been going through the listeners' minds when Jesus said, up comes a Samaritan down the road? When he used the word Samaritan, what do you think was going through the people's minds that he was talking to? Or worse than that, he might have been one of the perpetrators, that good-for-nothing Samaritan. That's what they thought about them. They were half-breeds. They had corrupted God's law, and they were just not worth giving the time of day. And they had done some of that. But they were still made in the image of God. They were still worthy of respect. And obviously they were some people. And so the point being is that Jesus picks a Samaritan here because this is the person that they would least likely expect to stop and help. If anything, the person they might expect him to throw stones at the guy, or something. But that's probably what went through their minds when he mentioned a Samaritan. But look what the Samaritan did. The same choice was confronted the Samaritan. Stop and help or go on. And it's the same thing as the priest and the Levite. And you know what? Pretty much the same excuses could have been there. And you might say, well, might not have been a religious, he probably didn't have religious duties, so to speak. He was going there for some reason. He had something going on. It's not like it wasn't inconvenient for this guy to stop. It's the same excuses could have been made by him. Go ahead, Frank.
Jesus used the foolish things of the world to conform the mind. So we're looking at, in the starting, it's a lawyer, academically educated, because for to be a lawyer in those days you have to read the Bible. So now Jesus is saying now, bringing the point to them.
Bringing what?
Bringing the point to them, and somebody
Yes.
seems to be in all the life, the foolish one. Let's see what he's going to do. So the story comes and they decide, well, hey, that's a unusual situation now. Let's see what his response is going to be.
He didn't make excuses, did he?
No.
He didn't make excuses. The lawyer, the expert in the law said, actually not the expert in the law, but the priest and the Levite said, what happens to me? What happens to me if I help this guy? The Samaritan asked, what happens to him if I don't? That's the difference. And for that reason, it says he runs toward the man. Doesn't it say that? Look at let's see if we can look this up. I think I've lost my spot. Luke 10. Let's see here. I get to verse 25. And it says, he went to him, and we said, hold on. But the Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him and went to him. He went to him. He didn't cross on the other side of the road. He went to him. And then, he had compassion on him. It says he runs toward the mess. We're talking about compassion can be messy. He runs toward the mess. Saw him, had compassion on him. Let's take a look. We have a few minutes left. I want to take a look at compassion quickly in the time we have left. Compassion has the capacity for feeling. Compassion has the capacity for feeling. It's not being calloused, like the gentleman said back here, callous. It's not being calloused. It's being able to feel for somebody else. It's have that empathy. You've heard of empathy before? Empathy is being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. By the way, those people that the police label as like psychopaths and sociopaths and things like that, do you know what the characteristic is that they most look at, or lack thereof, is empathy. Do not have a capacity for empathy, that person is a sociopath or a psychopath. It really is. Go ahead.
People in those days traveled with oil and
Yeah, and he was willing. Oil and wine were things that were of commodities. They were of value. He used his value. You know, I may not have mentioned it. It said it took out 2 silver coins. The amount of money he gave the innkeeper to help keep this guy there, that wasn't just for a day. That was a month. That was about a month, several weeks anyway, of stay at the hotel that he gave him. So it costs this. Compassion costs sometimes. We'll get to that in a moment. But capacity for feeling, empathy, and it is the precursor to mercy, by the way. Let's see here. Compassion, it does something. Compassion does something. He acted. Compassion costs something. It's not always free. Compassion means we are willing to sacrifice to be able to give something up to help somebody out. That's compassion. And then, however, I don't want to emphasize the sacrifice, though, because Jesus said it's more blessed to give than to receive. We actually receive a blessing for that. And so, let me close out here, Frank, just a second here. Then Jesus asked him a question, and it probably looked him in the eyes when he did it. He asked them this question: who was the neighbor? And I think, what else can he say? Notice he could not even bring himself to say the word Samaritan. He wasn't even going to say the word. He just said the one who had mercy on him, is what he said. Go ahead, Steve.
He wants to keep them law, love your neighbor.
Yeah, he probably was. Go ahead, Frank.
Jesus is teaching this young lawyer, or that lawyer. Look at the distance this guy go to do an act that he was not responsible for. Someone did not know. But look at the distance he goes. So
No, he didn't know.
Jesus is causing this lawyer to confess to something. No.
Hopefully, at least in his heart, anyway, he's getting him to realize what he's doing.
Jesus is asking him. So now we have come to the final analysis. Who then is his neighbor? And he had no choice but to say,
Yeah, you're right. He had no choice. And of course, on the broader scheme of things, he's not just talking to this expert in the law. He's talking to who? All of us. He's talking to all of us. Paul, and then we'll close out.
Just a comment to say, about 28 years ago, I was taking my daughter and my wife to the neighborhood pool. When we got to the pool, found there was a body sitting at the bottom of it. The man was dead. I jumped in, pulled him out, gave him CPR, brought him back to life. So the question is, what are you going to do when you see that person? I think that's what this parable is asking.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And I'm going to throw in a little challenge to you before we I know it's past time. Here's my little challenge to you this week. Ask yourself, what will I do this week to show compassion and mercy to somebody, maybe even someone I don't know? Okay? That's the challenge this week. And we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.